I grew up the son of a farmer who moved to a community on the south side of Greensboro where my father wanted his 4 sons to learn how to work hard like he did on a farm. And he succeeded in making all of us workaholics. But what he didn't realize was that he had moved to a community that was 95% black. My friends were basketball players. I ate dinner with their mothers. And most of my friends were destroyed as the years went on economically. And so if the world were a more just, better place, if economics worked the way they should work, I would be either a straggling basketball player in Europe or a jazz trumpet player. But that wasn't really the choice that was open to me. Self-help started in 1980. My wife and I started it. We had no money. Our goal was to translate the civil rights movement and the women's movement into the economic arena. We felt like during the 60s and 70s there had been a great progress legally, but if it didn't make a difference in the life that people could lead for their families, it would be hollow. And so that was our very naive beginning point. And by 1983, we realized that the businesses that we were helping to become worker co-ops couldn't get financing through traditional sources. And we said, well, if we're going to start a financial institution, it should be a cooperative financial institution. Plus, we didn't have any money, so we started a credit union and literally started with $77 at a bake sale from one of the very first groups that we worked with in New Bern, North Carolina. And that was the beginning for us. And we immediately had hundreds of churches who wanted to support our mission and bought into the crazy idea. I said, I've got this great idea. If we're as crazy as you think we might be and we go bankrupt, if you put your money into a credit union that's federally insured, you'll get all your money back. We'll be, excommunicated, but you'll be okay. So that idea of how do you take ordinary savings and convert it into development credit that can work to help people who've been left out was really the founding vision of why we ended up doing financing. But we didn't choose that. If anyone had ever told me that we would become a finance organization, I would have laughed at them. I mean, we were a civil rights group. That was our calling. But our theory was that we could help best by having black, white, female, and male workers all owning a piece of a business that they were working in together. And that's how we started. And we could not get financing from any other source, so we basically said we have no choice but to start our own and started the Self-Help Credit Union, which grew from that $77 first bake sale to about $2 billion over the years. But when we started Self-Help Credit Union and then started doing home lending, we found a couple of key facts in the early 80s. The first was that 60% to 70% of the wealth of all white families and black families was in home ownership equity held by the household. And so if you wanted to build wealth, you had to start there because that's where the wealth resided. We also found, and we were very early in this discovery, it seemed obvious, but it wasn't obvious to anyone at the time, that the difference between white and black wealth was overwhelming. So for black families, the average or the median net wealth in 1984 when we started the credit union was $3,800. For white families, it was $38,000, so it was 10 to 1. And almost every other pathology that you can look to is related to that wealth difference. So whether it means if people are going to Harvard, rich people get more affirmative action for the legacy admittees than black folks ever got entering into Ivy League schools. Or if you talk about kids going to college, the kids who had to work full-time jobs in order to go to college had a 2 times higher dropout rate. Anyone think that's not related to the wealth of your family of birth? It relates to everything. Whether you can have a down payment to start a home, whether you've got collateral that you can use to start a business. The wealth gap is really eroding the soul of America. So now here we are almost 40 years later, and the wealth gap between black and white is still 10 to 1, but that makes it sound like we've stayed even, and we really haven't. If you look at after inflation constant dollars, the 10 to 1 has grown from 30,000 in real dollars, from 3,800 to 38,000, to almost 150,000 of real gap between black and white today. So yes, it's still 10 to 1, but the actual magnitude of the difference is even worse now than it was then, and it will not eliminate itself. You know, I became 30 years ago an apostle for home ownership, that this was one of the ways. It's not sufficient. It's not the only strategy, because people who are owning their homes are not the poorest of the poor. They're the working poor. But it can make a real difference, and we have not in this country understood that home ownership and also college degrees are public goods, that your college education or your owning a home doesn't benefit just you. It actually benefits the whole community that you contribute to. A loan that is inherently structured to be abusive, it will do harm, not good. And so one of the very first stories that got us into the battle against subprime mortgage lenders was a borrower who came to us. One of my loan officers said, "Martin, I can't figure out what's going on with this borrower. He tells us that the subprime mortgage company, or the finance company that he got a mortgage from, will not allow him to pay off the loan." And it turned out they were the largest finance company in the world, had over $100 billion in assets. And that was the beginning of our battle in 1998 against subprime mortgage lenders. They did this to 200,000 families annually. And Self-Help, the largest community development lender in the country, that was more than we had accomplished in our entire history. So in 1 year, one bad actor could undo whatever gains on the racial wealth gap goals in one time. So at that point, for many, many years, people didn't talk about the wealth gap per se, even though we had gotten to a point where it was something like 11% of the American population owned 90% of the net tangible wealth in the country. It was just a really huge, dramatic concentration that was getting worse and worse and worse every single year. So on the opportunity side, if you own something, you can invest it, you can borrow against it, you can leverage it, and you can do things that are really important. In my first 10 years of making home loans to single African American mothers, we made over $100 million of home loans to families that no other bank would lend to. And I ask people often, what do you think my losses were? 1%, 3%? What do you think it would be? Over 11 years out of 100 million, our losses were zero, exactly zero. We didn't lose a single penny in 11 years. So we would have we had a couple of loans that foreclosed when people abandoned, but we didn't lose money even there. So what I felt like we proved, although, was that people of ordinary means who are working, immigrant families, black families, single-parent families, if given a fair chance, they can survive and thrive, but not if you put roadblocks that make it impossible. Well, it's always been, two steps forward, one step back. And people, I read a book recently saying, where is the movement? The movement's still here. It's always been there. And if you go back to 1865, when there were people who were creating HBCUs, black colleges for girls and for men out of slavery, the backlash in the South was dramatic. And when we say, well, we've had violence and political denial of the vote, all you have to do is go back to South Carolina in 1865 during Reconstruction. The majority of the voters in South Carolina were black. And the soldiers who came back, Confederate soldiers who came back, basically had a campaign of terror that said, if you show up to vote, we're going to kill you. And all of a sudden, all of the black vote disappeared. And so this is not new. When we started Self-Help, I had lots of solutions. A a bunch of them just didn't work. And so we had to evolve and change and listen. I remember in an early community, they said, Martin, we love the idea that you want black people to own businesses. We don't have any cash. How are you going to solve that? I'm like, that's pretty profound for someone who's a lawyer and an economics background. And so it's trying to figure out and solve problems by listening first. You've got to have, as a teacher, an engagement, a dialogue with people who are different than you, and you have to bring whatever is your own truth, but not be so, so enamored with yourself that you think you got it, because there's no answer that is simple. I have a couple of quotes that I love. One is from Frederick Douglass, is my favorite speaker. And the quotes that people haven't heard, he's got one where he says, it's far better to build strong children than to repair broken men. There's a piece of wisdom right there, that we should be working to prevent brokenness in communities rather than trying to rebuild them after they're broken.